Well, very good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar about leading transformation with myself, Chris Williams, and joining me is Lorna Sheldon. Change and transformation is a constant, and today all businesses are having to deal with change, rapidly having to transform their operating structures and adapt due to COVID-19. Now, in any form of change and transformation, leadership is needed, not just for your employees, but your customers also. They're looking to you to lead them. And this quote from Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, is very poignant, I feel. And it states there that in today's era of volatility, there is no other way but to reinvent. The only sustainable advantage you can have over others is agility. That's it, because nothing else is sustainable. Everything else you create, somebody else will replicate. And I just think they're really sort of poignant words in today's world of change and transformation. The businesses that survive and thrive are the ones ultimately who lead. So motivating, inspiring, and leading through challenging times requires excellent communication skills, presentation skills, and the ability to hold the attention of your audience. Achieving this can seem much harder today as we're all locked down, but it is possible. And so today, a key principle of leading change is the ability to communicate with impact, and communications are therefore critical. For today's session, we're going to be focusing on the communication element of leading change, specifically how to get across your messages with impact given the environment that we find ourselves in. I'm going to be sharing some tips on how to get your message across, even when using platforms such as this on Zoom. Today, joining me is Lorna D. Sheldon. Now, Lorna is a heavyweight in communications. She's trained in over 20 countries around the world over the last 28 years. Lorna has helped CEOs and heads of states in transformation, enabling them to lead change and transformation through effective communication skills. Now, Lorna will share with you her top tips around the power of the voice to help you lead through in these challenging times by ensuring that your communication and, importantly, your presenting skills are where they need to be. Now, this is all about pace, projection, pitch, and pause. Lorna, welcome to today's session, and thank you very much for joining me and the rest of the team here. I'm now going to hand over to you to take us through the webinar.
Thank you, Chris. It's lovely to be with you. And hello, everybody. Good afternoon. In the words of John Lilly, who was the previous chief exec of Mozilla, I wanted to use his words to kick off today. And they're fairly strong words. He says, our only security is our ability to change. Now, if you just look at the things that we are having to face at this very moment in time, it's obvious that the only route forward is to change. And I feel that we're faced with great dollops of insecurity. And we're asking ourselves, is our business going to survive? Do we have to lay off our staff? Will the financial world cope, or is it going to collapse? And as we're submerged in our fears for the future, we ask, will we ever return to the same position as we were before? Can you pop the next slide up, Chris? My answer to that is a resounding no. I don't think we will. And I think you'll probably agree with me. Life and business is just not going to be the same again. We're learning different approaches. We're establishing new ways to communicate with people. And we thank our lucky stars, although I do have my doubts at times, but we thank our lucky stars for living in the digital age with all its challenges, because we can now see avenues of escape to take us forward. We can see paths that we can walk our way down. All of this wasn't available to us 30 years ago. So we have great advantages sitting right at our doorstep. And I think we have to concentrate on those more than the fears that we have for the future, because by concentrating on the steps that we can put into practice, by making a difference as we communicate with people, hopefully many of those fears will disappear. As leaders and emerging leaders, we need to achieve the 3 C's to be 100% sure of our word, that our words are backed up with credibility. Can we have the next slide, Chris? Technology, sorry, that's the best one. No, previous one, please, that's wonderful. Mastering credibility. I talk to people a lot about the 3 personal ingredients we need to achieve impact and influence on the people that we're speaking to. And those 3 are having confidence, having competence, and having good communication. Those equal our credibility. Now, you know you're good at your job. You're fully conversant with the facets of your business. That's your competence. But what happens if the confidence doesn't match up to the competence and the communication skills are let down because we're not that good at communicating, we're not comfortable, we've never bothered to really think about a training in communication skills? What happens is that if those 2 on the outside of our sandwich don't match up to your competence, then your credibility dips. Just think about achieving this high level of credibility and how we can communicate with impact and influence. We need to address the very skills and the techniques that we use when we are speaking on an everyday basis. And we need to bring those skills to our digital platforms, because from here on, a lot of what we're going to be doing, and that of the people that work with you and for you, will be on digital platforms. Let's take a look at how things have changed in the digital world. And this is where I think it gets a little bit scary, but then I've told us we're dropping the fears, so let's take the word scary out of it as well. But things have changed. We're now apparently speaking 5 times faster than we did in 1986. It's a long time ago, but it's amazing how it is said that we have speeded up that much. We apparently now form opinions in milliseconds, but I can remember back when I started running my company, what was it, 29 years ago this year, that I could say to people, it takes 5 to 10 seconds to form the first opinion of someone. And yet now, it was January last year, 2019, when the media stated, we now form opinions in milliseconds. Along the same lines, and again in the media, I read that that we only concentrate for 50 seconds now. Well, you can see that a lot when you're talking to people, but it used to be 15 minutes. That is a massive change. And in September of last year, the BBC did state that they were thinking of reducing their 30-minute news program to 3 minutes because people didn't bother to listen after the first 3 minutes. All a bit shocking, don't you think? Can we have the next slide, please, Chris? So the challenges, excuse me, that we are facing, the ones I've just mentioned, and there are many more, are due to a number of things. And from that, the reaction of those number of things is affecting the way we communicate. The first thing is that because we're speaking too fast, the reason for that is punctuation is disappearing. People are no longer pausing in the right place to take a breath. So we keep speaking and we keep going on and on and on until we run out of breath, and then we grab a breath, which is usually in the middle of a sentence, which tends to make absolutely sure that people aren't going to follow what we're saying. Because we are speaking so fast again, our voice tends to flatten. If we have no movement in the voice, then the voice becomes boring. Without making the necessary pauses to breathe, we find that the projection, our stronger voice, is being diminished. And again, people will stop listening. If you have people that you are talking to on your digital meetings where they can actually see and hear you and see in that those few things that I've mentioned, that it appears the confidence is dipping, and it is in many different ways. The nerves start to increase because you're not getting the reactions you want, and people are no longer listening. So you can put those in whichever order you want, but it's all based really on the fact that punctuation is disappearing and we have speeded up. So what we need to do now is, can we have the next slide, please? We need to think yet again at what is happening because of the challenges, because of the way things are changing. We're getting misinterpretations of information. We're getting misunderstandings of information. We're getting total loss of information because people are switching off. Now, what I'm going to talk about today, and this is where we start with the 4 skills that you need to really engage people's listening and to come across with impact and influence. We need to look at first, next slide please, Chris, the speed of speaking. Now people, as I've said, and you'll probably hear me say it again and again, people are speaking too fast. What happens? We switch off. You speak too slowly, and you still occasionally get people who speak very slowly. You bore people to tears. In fact, I can remember sitting in a luncheon many, many years ago with a very notable speaker who had a very slow, flat, boring, and monotonous voice. And it was only when he said the words, "and finally," that people sat up and listened as they'd all sunk slowly into their seats. Speak too slowly, you bore people. A single moderate speed, which would be between your fast speed and your slow speed, it becomes boring as well. In fact, both slow speed and moderate speed used alone will become boring. The faster speed will become irritating. So what we need to do is think about, well, how can we change this? How can we speak in a way that people will listen? Now, this is a fairly challenging technique. I'm going to explain it to you really very, very, very slowly, and I hope you pick it up, but please do not be afraid to ask again if you don't understand it. What I developed 29 years ago when I set up my company, I designed and developed this particular technique, and that is using all 3 speeds in exactly the same at the same time. Now, you may think, oh, that sounds a bit confusing. Yes, it will to start with, and I'll explain it slowly. What we need to do is get a pattern of those 3 speeds, which each individual speed will produce a result, but together they will produce an overall command of the communication situation. In other words, once you've got this on board, you will notice immediately that people will begin to listen to you with more attention and get more involved with what you're talking about. I'm absolutely sure that you, on Zoom, if you're using Zoom or another form of online platform, you will have seen the people attending your meetings in, let's call it the gallery. And I certainly have noticed that when somebody is speaking, quite often those people in the gallery are either looking at their phones or they're gazing around their office space, which is obviously their home space, and I'll come back to that in a bit. And we really need to think about how we can command that listening definitely on a digital platform. So let me give you the technique, and then we can work it from there. Your first speed in this pattern of 3 is in fact the bottom one in that list. It's the moderate pace. Now, what does the moderate pace do? If you use it in a very short space of time and you continually repeat it over and over again, because of the closeness of it in the very short pattern of 3, you will find that everybody picks up on all the information that you're giving to them. They won't lose anything because the use of the moderate pace and then the repetitiveness of it is that close together. So you can guarantee that if you're using this technique, they will pick up on the information. Your second speed is the slightly faster speed. Now, what's the faster speed going to do if it's only used in a very, very short space of time? The faster speed is going to motivate and energize your listeners. They're going to get more excited about what you're talking about. They're going to get involved. And if you use your body language online the same as you would normally, then you will find that that too will become more prominent when you go that little bit faster. You become more interesting to look at, as well as more interesting to listen to. So now we've got two speeds. We've got our moderate pace and we have got our slightly faster pace. Now, when it came to the slow pace and how we could use that effectively, I have to say I was a bit nonplussed to start with. I spent ages and ages listening and watching the great orators of history on film and audio, trying to work out what it was that they were able to use in their toolbox that held multitudes of people waiting word for word of what they were going to say. And it came to me after a very short while, having said that, I did watch an awful lot, that what they were all using was the power of emphasis. And because of the use of emphasis, what did it do? It anchored the listening. So your slow speed is word by word, spaced out, and each word is strongly emphasized. Now that I've told you the three, you'll hear that I speak in that pattern of speaking the whole time. It is incredibly powerful. Now, just to exaggerate it just a little bit, I've got 3 sentences up there, and I will read those in the format that I've just talked to you about. Keep it in mind, moderate pace first, slightly faster paced, and slow pace bringing up the rear. The change in pace holds attention. Change means variety. Try to use 3 different speeds of speaking. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. If you can get that technique on board, you watch your listeners, watch the people on your screen, see the way they suddenly become totally involved with what you're saying. Now, it sounds complicated, so I'm going to give you a very easy way of learning how to do it. The automatic reaction is to start with what I said, the moderate pace. It is the first, the fast is the second, the slow is the third. But we can learn the slow speed much more quickly because all we have to do, excuse me, is to emphasize our words. So if you bring in slightly stronger emphasis, you will already have 2 speeds. You'll have the speed that you are already using, and you'll now have the slow speed. All you have to do is ask yourself, is the speed I am already using the fast speed, or is it the moderate speed? And whichever one it is, then you know you've only got to add 1 more, and you've got all 3. So I do hope that you will give that a real good go, because it's worth it, because you begin to be totally in control and it gives you far more impact and influence. Now let's turn to the next slide, and the next area that we're going to talk about is projection. I tend to think that at this point in time, I need to mention to you what I call the second impression. Now, we've talked about the first impression, which is forming an opinion of you the minute we see you. We all know about that. But what's this second impression that I'm talking about? The second impression is made the very moment that you start to speak. Now, if you project your voice really well, then you're onto a winner. If you are slightly apprehensive, you're slightly nervous, you may not feel overly comfortable with the situation, then what will happen as you start to speak is that your voice will become much quieter and it sounds almost as though it's going down your throat rather than being well projected to your listeners. Excuse me while I have a quick drink of water. Now, unfortunately, the second impression or the second opinion is formed on that first few words. If the voice is retracted instead of projected, then, and it becomes much quieter, your listeners will immediately consider that you are not confident. Remember our confidence, competence, and communication. Confidence is absolutely paramount today. We have got to convey that confidence. What happens is that if we don't appear confident right at the beginning, then that reflects on our professionalism. It reflects on our knowledge of our subject, and it certainly reflects on the fact that you don't sound as though you were prepared. But you project right from the minute you start that powerful, in control, impact, influence. The whole thing reverses. People immediately sit up. This person is not only confident, they're very professional. They know exactly what they're talking about. I can get on with this person. I can put my trust in this person. And they obviously are well prepared. So we need to get that projection out. So we must keep the throat open. Now, I'm not asking you to sit there with a Cheshire grin on your face, but if you can possibly relax the face, and a half smile, I always think makes a huge difference to people, then you will find that the throat will relax. The muscles in the face relax, the throat relax. You are far more likely to project your voice well. So keep the throat open, relax the throat, project the voice. The second point, and notice I'll touch on posture right at the end. The second is breathing. Yeah, well, it helps. It helps a lot. Now, I've lost count of all the people I've worked with who very, very engagingly take a nice deep breath to start with, and they're about to speak, but then they let the air out and they have no air left when they start to speak. And yet they become very breathy, which in turn will affect the nervous system, and you will find that you are not going to be effective. Use the opportunity to breathe deeply before you start and control that breathing to really throw those words out to people. And there's a great exercise that you can practice to really, really get yourself going on this. And it's to take a very deep breath. And you obviously need some sort of time machine, so get your stopwatches out. And I want you to keep your shoulders down. Take a deep breath, keep your shoulders down. Let the air out on a long R sound. Let that R come from the stomach area, your core when you're speaking. Don't let it go up to the chest area. And keep going and just see how long you can keep that power up of that sound of R for as long as you possibly can. When you have hit 30 seconds, half a minute, you know that you are breathing well. The last point is your posture. Now, when you're sitting down, it is almost always far more difficult to project the voice than it is when you're standing up. But we are going to be sitting down. Here we are talking to people on Zoom and other platforms, as I mentioned before, rather than list them all. And we're going to be sitting down. So we need to think about posture in a sitting position. And the only way to get really good posture in a sitting position is to think about putting your feet flat on the floor. The minute your feet are flat on the floor, your spine's in an upright position, your posture is far better, you can breathe much more effectively, and you can project the voice much better than you would had you not got your posture right. Please don't lean over the table, don't lean over the desk. You're not trying to reach out to people in that way. Let the voice reach out for you. Can we have the next slide, please, Chris? Now, this slide, I hope, will give you a bit of a smile. It's a right complicated slide here. We've got all sorts of stuff on here. But take a good look at those people in those pictures, because basically they're bored to tears. They've all gone to sleep, I think, or pretty well. And the reason for that is there's no inflection in the voice. And the minute somebody's voice flattens and it sounds really, really boring, believe you me, this is what happens to the people you're speaking to. You've got to wake them up a bit. Now, you must realize that your inflection fits into what I would term, and most people would in same sort of field of business, your voice band. You have a baseline in your voice band. You have a top line, and your top line is as far as your voice can go up without going past the credibility band. If your voice goes too high, you lose credibility. Your baseline is where you should start speaking from at the beginning of each sentence. So your looping movement in my little diagram at the bottom on the right is to give you an idea of how the voice should be moving. Now we have a bit of a disadvantage if we're female, because a female voice is nearly always higher than a male voice. And if you have a female voice and they're slightly nervous as well, the voice will go up quite a bit higher, and that doesn't leave you very much room to have any movement in the voice up and down, and you tend to get stuck on one particular level, and that can be very grating on the listeners. And it can be, in certain situations in boardrooms, a problem where the women in the room, your female board members, don't always get listened to. So what about the male species? Do you have any problems with your inflection? Well, there is a good chance that your voices might be just a little bit too low in total. So you may have to move the voice up just a little bit. So it's a case of getting the voice moving up and down the whole time you're speaking. Now, what I've got here is a few words relative to a song which I discovered when I was plowing through all vast amounts of information. And I don't want you to sing it, and certainly not now. You can go away and have a go with this afterwards. And if you read it, it tends to increase your inflection. It doesn't matter what I say, so long as I sing with inflection that makes you feel that I'll convey some inner truth of vast reflection. So the voice is moving up and down the whole time. I'm not suggesting that you take it to that level, but your voice does need to move up and down. So we don't want flat, boring voices. We want people who can use their voice in a way that persuades and draws people in. And if you pop on to the next slide, please, Chris, we can see a diagram by Andy Grove, who set up Intel. And I want you to look at his diagram. It's an incredibly simple diagram. But what he is saying is that if you use your voice from your baseline to your highest line in your voice band and down again, it's exactly the same as my diagram before. It's just that his looks a bit more attractive. Then your business will reach new heights. If, however, you don't use your whole voice band, if your voice is either flat or has little movement in it, he believes your business will decline. That, I think, underlines the absolute necessity in concentrating of this impact and influence, this power in communication. We must get that inflection going. We really must. Now let's move to our next slide. Can we have our next slide, Chris? On the pause. This is the last point that I want to put across to you today. We've talked about pace, we've talked about projection, we've talked about pitch, the inflection in the voice. We need to get all of these four working together, because if one of them isn't as strong as the others, it will fall apart and you won't have the same power, you won't have the same impact, and you won't have the same influence on your listeners. But your pause is as powerful as speech. Your pause allows you to draw in your listeners. It allows you time to think about how your meeting is going, how your presentation is going. It allows information that you have given people to be absorbed, gives you time to watch the people who are listening to you, and in so doing, being aware of whether you need to change route. And it also obviously allows you time to breathe, which is bringing back that power of communication. There are so many benefits to bringing back the pause. Now, I'm going to tell you a little story about Nationwide Building Society. I think they'd be quite pleased if they knew I was doing a bit of advertising for them. But it's very, very interesting that Nationwide have used in their advertising on television the power of the pause over the last 2 years. Now, if you have been aware of their advert, don't worry if you haven't, we don't all sit and watch adverts. If you have been aware of their advert, you will have noticed that they've changed it recently, but for a good 18 months, it was the same thing. They have either 1 people, 2 people, or 3 people. They have either older people, young people, children, all ages, and every one of them spoke in rhyme. And after you'd heard this rhyme going for a very short space of time, it suddenly stopped. And whatever you were doing while you waited for the adverts to move on so you could watch your program, you would suddenly find that you'd look up at the screen. And you'd look up at the screen, and the moment you looked at the screen, across the screen would come the words, Nationwide Building Society. Now, I'd love to speak to their advertising agents, and I'd love to shake their hand, because what they did was use the full length of a pause that you can use before people look up. And it was very cleverly done, and it's approximately 10 seconds. Now, I don't suggest you try that when you're speaking in meetings online or giving a presentation online, because that 10 seconds would probably convey to people that you've forgotten what you were going to say. You can leave good long pauses, but avoid going for the full length of 10 seconds. Now, what do we do with these pauses? Can we have the next slide, please, Chris? What we tend to do with them at the moment, we don't use them, but we're putting in filler words that have absolutely no meaning. What it is doing, it is underlining our lack of preparation. And the one that really irritates me at the moment, and it probably does you as well, is the word so. So, everything is so this, so that, so the other. Your so is creating a huge problem, because what we tend to do, and I'll just give you a short sentence. So, presentation skills are really important. What did I do? I put the emphasis on so. Immediately, the emphasis is removed from the message that's important. And that's what's happening. We're going so, and then we tend to speak. And all the effort is on a word that has absolutely no meaning whatsoever. The 5 most used filler words are so, now, right, well, okay. Again, I've lost count on how many people start off with right, well, good morning, everybody. You don't need the right and the well. There's something else I'll give you to put in there on another webinar sometime in the future. But these words that we're putting in are annoying people, and they're irritating. If somebody keeps saying actually the whole time, actually this, actually that, actually the other, within a very short space of time, you are only listening to the word actually. You are missing what else is being said. So we really have got to think seriously about the use of our communication skills. I hope that you will take on board everything that I've said today. It's just literally scratching the surface, this is, but they are 4 of the most important techniques that you are going to need on a digital platform. Things are changing. We know they are. A load of your meetings are now going to be on Zoom or equivalent. A load of opportunities will be speaking to customers and clients who in this situation are equally as important as your staff and your employees. Please keep them all on the same level when you're thinking about them. We need to communicate really powerfully. And as a leader in your profession, you could be making these changes to your communication, and then your people will measure the success of your reactions that you're getting and will adapt and use the same skills. But as you watch people, you'll realize they're giving you intensive listening. They'll be taking on board all the information you give them. And because of this, they will respond more favorably, and ultimately, you will get more positive action in your meetings and your presentations. But don't expect it to be easy. All change is challenging. Could we have the last but one slide, please? I found you'll notice Chris and I are really up to using our quotations. And there's nothing like a good quote, and certainly one you can use at the beginning of your meetings. Now, Niccolo Machiavelli said, "There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things." You want people to pick up on what I've said today. You want those who are working for you and in your teams to go out and take their messages in the same way that gives them impact and influence, and in turn reflects on you and your vision. And with the last slide, one more quote. There is a snag. George Bernard Shaw said, "The only problem with communication is the illusion that it has taken place." And what that says to you is, don't assume that when you are speaking, people have understood everything that you've said. Check, check, and check again. Ask, is everybody clear on that? Has everybody understood the point I've just put across? Because if you don't, people won't necessarily put their hand up. And if they do, it will only be twice. They will never ask a third time. And I'll leave you with that conundrum. But take up the challenge yourselves. We accept change is difficult, and we are facing the biggest threat to life and our economy with this coronavirus. But we can overcome the business challenges by learning to communicate with impact and influence. Over to you, Chris.
Lorna, thanks. That was I've had the working with you before. I've also been trained by you, and I'm trying desperately not to use any filler words now after seeing all of that. But I myself took a lot from it. So thank you ever so much. Obviously, there's an opportunity to ask questions, folks. If anybody's got any questions that they would like to ask, there was a couple, Lorna, that came through just in the sort of final throes of your presentation there. So I'll just put these to you now. There's two here. One question was, how important are the slides that are being used?
How important were the slides?
Yeah, so
yes. I think the slides are incredibly important, and I'm not saying that my particular design of the slides is necessarily the ones to use, but because everybody will have a different message, they can probably get what I'm saying across in a different way. But they're very basic, they're very straightforward. People, on the whole, I think a very large percentage of people are visual. And if they can see something that underlines or backs up what the person is saying, then I think it makes a clearer understanding of the message. And I've said this many times to people who use PowerPoint. Your PowerPoint is a support mechanism. It is not the most important part of your program, your presentation, your meeting. You are the most important. The person who is speaking is the most important person, but we need something to help people understand. So it becomes our support mechanism.
One of the other questions that there was a couple of people asked this, it was around nerves. They're talking about whether that was, public speaking in the sort of old world as it was when we were able to liaise with people sort of face to face and present, but also people saying that they seem to suffer with nerves even when they're doing something like this, they're presenting. Obviously, people display different different reactions to nerves, but one of the questions, or a couple of them, are all around the same point, which is how can you handle that? How can you manage nerves before doing something like this, or presenting essentially? If you're a leader, or even not just a leader, you want to deliver a message, to your customer, for example. Well, we seem to have lost Lorna. Sorry about that, guys. I don't know if she's going to jump back on. I know some of you are still on here. Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. If Lorna doesn't rejoin us in the next few moments, I will re-record that final set to get that to get the answer to that question, because I'm not quite sure what it exactly would be. There's a couple of other things that are coming through. If something else that I might be able to answer if we wait for Lorna to come back on. There's a question here that's just come through actually from Steve about, well, first and foremost, I'm glad this has been really insightful for you. The question that's been posed is around, is there somewhere else we can get some more interest to really sort of round this off, and how long can it potentially take to become second nature? That's obviously definitely one that we're going to have to pose to Lorna. So I'm not quite sure what's happened there, but as I say, what I'll do, guys, ladies and gents, is I will ask these questions and get those questions added to the end of this, and then I will redistribute this over a video to you. So I'll send out the links. It'll also be updated onto the Novus website. So if you go to novus-strategy.com, what you can do is, if you go to the Lunch and Learn section, the Lunch and Learn webinars that we've done or I've done, I always post them there. There's a couple of people asking, are they going to be posted online? So yes, they will be on demand, and you can have those afterwards. And what I'll do is the questions that have been posed, I will take those to Lorna, I'll record it, and then literally just, I don't know what the phrase is technically, but stitch it onto the end of this session so you can see exactly what that is. So it doesn't look like Lorna's going to be able to rejoin. Maybe there's a power cut or something like that, but never mind. At least you got to see the whole presentation. I hope you found that insightful and useful. Thanks again for joining us. Oh, Lorna's coming back in. Here we go.
I'm back.
I've been filling Lorna as best as I could.
I'm sure you've been entertaining people brilliantly. Unfortunately, with our setup, one of the wires had come out. I do apologise.
You're quite all right. So,
I might be brilliant at communication skills, but don't expect me to match that with my technology skills. Sorry, the question was nerves, wasn't it?
yeah.
Right, well, first of all, let me just say to you, in relation to what I have just gone through with you, the more you do those skills and techniques, the more it builds your confidence. Now, why does it build your confidence? It builds your confidence because you're getting better reactions from the people you're speaking to. So as you see those reactions starting to take place, you in turn will build on those skills even more. Now, that will happen anyway. We are all nervous to begin with. There's very few people that aren't. And if it makes those people feel slightly more reassured who are listening, I had a gentleman come on a one-to-one course not so long ago, and he is the chief exec of a very big international organization, and he is terrified, absolutely terrified of running a meeting, terrified of standing up to speak. He's terrified of being in control of a situation where people are listening. So nobody is on their own. What you need to do is be very, very well prepared If you're not prepared, the nerves will kick in straight away. You need to be very well prepared. You need to consider your timing that is allowed. And you need, and I'll say again and again, and people don't like it, write yourself a script to begin with if you've got something important to say. Write a script, read it through a few times, and then stick it over there out of the way. Write yourself some bullet points, and you will, in your head, have a retainer of that information. You're not going to say it word for word, but you'll know where you're going. You'll know where you're going to pick up from if there's questions, and it will be much easier for you to feel more confident. There are other little techniques about, little simple ones. There's something called the Sarnoff technique, which in fact you can do even in front of a group of people once you've had a bit of practice at it. And I'll share that with you if you think it might help. The Sarnoff technique is all about breathing. And when we think about our communication, everything is based on our breathing. Now, the Sarnoff technique allows you to breathe, to get your breathing back under control, and nerves will tend to throw it out. Your first step in your Sarnoff technique is to pull your stomach in very sharply and take in a quick breath. So you go, and you hold the muscles tight. So you can't breathe out. You've got to breathe in again. So you breathe in again. This time you fill your lungs. So now you've breathed in twice. You still haven't let the air out. There is a small area in the chest cavity, and you're going to fill that as well. So you take in a third breath without breathing out once. You have now breathed in 3 times. You are shooting oxygen to the brain. Please do not do this over and over again because you will pass out. Once you have taken in 3 breaths, allow that breath to come out. And what you have done is taken the most amount of air your body will hold. As you let it out and you get to the point where you can no longer let your air out anymore, you are at the base of where you should be breathing from. You will then take a very deep breath and you will carry on, and your nerves will be in control, under control. It's a very simple technique, but it works.
Brilliant. There's a couple of other questions that came, one of which I was able to answer, which is this stuff going to be posted?
I'm sorry, Chris, I can't hear you very well.
Oh, I don't know if that's my microphone, but
that's better.
There we go. So yeah, there was a couple of other questions, one of which I was able to answer in relation to this being on demand and available online afterwards, which I've said yes, I'll post up on the Novus website, and anybody that's registered for this, they'll be sent a link. There was another question, a final one, which answered now, which came in from Steve. First of all, we said it's fantastic insight, but the question is this something that we can learn ourselves, and is there a course where we can really round off these skills, followed by how long does it take to sort of this become second nature?
I still can't hear you terribly well, but I think I've got the gist of the question. I run courses for people to go through all of the skills and techniques that they need. I work on a one-to-one basis. I work in groups generally within the office arena. I can organise open days. I used to run a lot of them, but don't do so much now because the corporate demand is so much greater. But more than happy to talk to people and to talk over what they feel they need and to give them some advice and some information. And if it's a course they want, we can work something out.
How long does it take to master these skills, Lorna?
Exactly 1 day. So don't let anybody else kid you that it's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks, because it doesn't. I must say, I once got invited by a company to quote on the basis of this professor of communication skills had been working with this class for 2 years, but all of a sudden they needed someone to come in to teach them some public speaking and presentation skills. And I had to ask, well, what the heck's he been doing for the last 2 years? You don't need 2 years. Truthfully, you can master this in 1 day.
Obviously, it takes practice, of course, as well.
Oh, it's all about practice afterwards, but people can see halfway through the day, they can see the difference already. They'll see the amount of changes that can be made, but it's not changing the person. It's giving the person skills and techniques. And once they build up those skills and techniques, they wrap their own personality around it. We don't want everybody looking exactly the same.
Of course, brilliant. Well, I'm mindful of everybody's time. So thank you once again, Lorna. That was brilliant as ever. Really appreciate you taking the time to come on to one of my Lunch and Learn webinar series. Thank you to everybody that's joined us today. If you would like to get in touch with Lorna, you can connect with her on LinkedIn, and your website, Lorna, is lornadsheldon.com, is it?
I think it was up on the first slide, if you pop it back up.
Oh, I'm sure we can pop it back up there, but yeah. Oh, there you go.
No, I think there's me. There you are, right at the bottom.
lornadsheldon.com if you want to get in contact with Lorna. But once again, thanks for joining us. Stay safe. Hope you have a wonderful weekend, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks with another Lunch and Learn session. Thanks once again.